All right, guys. So what we're going to look at in this video is how to deal with a situation where some kind of loss of relationship has been a direct contributing factor to whatever that interior condition is, depression, anxiety, hopelessness, despair, whatever it is. Relationships are such a huge part of life, and I wanted to be sure to include at least one specific lesson, one dedicated lesson within the main body of this course. So that's what we're going to look at in this video. Okay, so what I want to do right at the outset is start with a kind of guiding principle when it comes to relationships in our life. And that principle is essentially to have a nice, beautiful, pleasant, enjoyable relationship. I first have to be free of this compulsive demand to have that relationship. That's the prerequisite. That's sort of the bar that I have to at least be that height or higher to enter and have this beautiful relationship. If within me there is this compulsive demand to have that person in my life, whether this person that we're talking about is a particular kind of relationship with a romantic interest, our spouse, partner, whether it's siblings, children, parents, if there's any kind of clinging, grasping, desperation in that relationship, it can't possibly be this nice, genuine, free expression of real relationship. Because in that condition of demanding, clinging, attachment forms. It's actually, attachment has already formed, and that's why there are these expressions of clinging to these relationships. And remember, we looked at that illustration to convey what these attachments, once they form, are really like. So this was the illustration that we had looked at, talking about this boulder of identity, which is one and the same as the boulder of attachment. Being attached to somebody provides me with a certain sense of identity. And the reason that we have it alongside this vibrant tree with its roots deep down into this into soil, we're labeling this as true meaning. So what we're saying is that these attachments that we have to people that we're describing here in this talk, but also it could be attachments to reputation, possessions, anything at all, that those become stand-ins, substitutes, in place of having a real, true source of meaning in our lives, an ever-renewing source of real meaning. And so you might look out at a couple and you would never be able to spot the attachment. Or maybe looking at your own relationship, one that has proven to be a bit difficult. And it might be hard to really spot what the attachment is, or that there even is attachment, because these boulders tend to be buried underground. But we see it in the effects. In this case, we see the yellowing grass growing above this area. This tree has no nutrients feeding it, so it's withering away. So when there's attachment in our relationships, there will tend to be less genuine connection with that person. There'll be abruptness, coldness, sharpness. Because anything that they do that seems to threaten this security that I have in this attachment calls up a quick retort, a rapid, sometimes even a violent expression verbally. And so all we're saying here is that when our relationships are founded upon this attachment, when this becomes the basis of those relationships, which comes with clinging and everything else, that you can't really have this beautiful, peaceful life, this beautiful, peaceful expression of relationship between two people. And so what we're doing by looking at this, we're not trying to make this a more painful experience, saying, here's why things went wrong. We're bringing this up so that you understand, here's how things got this way. I can see, if this applies, that there was this attachment in this relationship. You know, there's that saying from the movie Jerry Maguire, "You complete me." That's a pretty dangerous statement to make. It's actually a completely inaccurate statement. It's kind of just a romantic ideal because it's incomplete. The fact is, every person completes you, completes me. And what I mean by that is anybody you meet, they are the perfect complement to highlight and bring out of you certain principles, certain realizations. It can be an ice cold, stern checkout person at the grocery store. And they are perfectly complementary. They are completing you in that moment by helping you to reveal whatever it is that they reveal within you. Could be impatience, could be a harsh, judging character within you that's judging the person for being what they are. So that person is actually completing you, helping you to know all of what you are, and in doing so, to be free of it. So that's why that statement, "you complete me," is so dangerous. If you're saying it about the whole of life, the whole of this moment, perfectly fine, because this moment is the perfect complement. We are the complement to this moment, and it completes us in the same way that I just described with that checkout person. Or if you're making that statement about every person on the planet, then you're bringing real facts into that statement. Now, you know, I should bring this up. Now, what we just talked about, that can elicit an objection in the form of, you're saying our relationship isn't special, that you could have anybody, any old person could complete you? You're saying what we have isn't special? Not at all. In fact, nobody can do for you what this one person does for you. They are this unique kind of a key and lock situation. They are the key that unlocks certain parts of you in a very unique way, particular to them, irreplaceable. But in a truly mature relationship, both people would be able to hear this idea that everybody is our complement, our perfect complement. They complete us by revealing ourselves to ourselves. In a mature relationship, both people can hear that idea and see the beauty in it. Not be threatened by it at all. Because it's the fact of what real life is. Now, likewise, also in a mature relationship, either person, now we're talking about a relationship that is free of this attachment, where there isn't this clinging tendency at the basis of it. So in this truly mature relationship, either person could go to the other and say, you know, I have to go away. And it wouldn't be a problem. Now, don't worry, this isn't something, because our minds will tend, remember the warning about don't extrapolate. Don't extrapolate what this means. This doesn't mean just a willy-nilly relationship where anything goes. I go and spend time with anybody at any point. It isn't like that. It isn't like you suddenly fall under a completely set of chaotic laws. The laws of life are still here. The principles that are bearing down upon us are still here. This is actually this kind of understanding, this understanding that would be able to hear the words, I have to go away, and be fine with it. Let there be a peaceful parting of ways. That understanding, because it's active in that relationship, will tend to keep that relationship together, not drive it apart. Because each of us provide this perfect home for the other, this perfect home meaning this perfect space within the moment. No clinging and demanding that I be different. A kind of relaxed ease that lets you be what you are, you let me be what I am. So now let's look at this situation. And, this is a broad umbrella. We've got relationships with spouse, children, parents, significant other, partners, husbands, wives. So you have to kind of discern how these things apply in those different situations. Sometimes we'll be talking about them specifically from the romantic side of things, the husband, wife, partner, boyfriend, girlfriend side. So what I want to look at is a relationship that ends in a kind of psychological or emotional disaster, where you've been just spent, exhausted, depleted. If that relationship doesn't end in a calm, peaceful, gentle parting of ways, that means that we were engaged in a kind of mutual exploitation of the other. That's what clinging is. That's what desperately holding on to somebody for my security is. It's a kind of exploitation of that person. Now, don't jump to any conclusions on this. We're not saying that there wasn't love, genuine feelings of appreciation in there as well. But what we're saying is that when this relationship ends up just running me through the ringer, it's founded upon the wrong principles. There's self-centeredness in there. There's egotism in there. False identity, clinging to that person for security. And what you'll often find in these cases is that it is, in one way or another, it's dominated by longing. Remember, we had an illustration of the cloud of identification, which represents these two parts within us that, when we don't understand them, go to war against each other. And so what we looked at, in fact, I'm going to bring it up here, just to bring you up to speed quickly in case you haven't seen this yet. The cloud of identification is actually very similar to the cloud of imagination. We talked about how our own imagination, when we go to sleep at night, does power these nightmares that we can have from time to time, where within our own mind, within this dream, we feel ourselves being pursued by some kind of attacker, and we end up feeling the conflict, we feel the fear, and can actually wake up with a racing heart, sweaty palms. Our own mind can split itself in two like this and create this nightmare. Well, the exact same thing happens when we have waking nightmares, crises in real life, crises in relationships. And in particular, what I want to go back to is when we looked at the cloud of identification relative to being identified with having this condition in my life, this want. Now here, we were looking at a cafe. I want to open my little business, and how that intense urge, it's all consuming. This is all I can think about. And so what ends up happening is I fall into this state where a nonstop field of longing is driving me. I just feel longing, this urge to get this want, to get this person into my life. Now, in place of the cafe, let's put that other person there. when I become identified with having that person in my life at any cost, I enter into this state of identification where longing is the basis of that relationship. And men have this, women have this. Men, you know what it's like. You see the woman and you think, oh my God, if I could just have her in my life, man, things would be great. Now, just so you know, that is a form of weakness, that kind of longing. And here's why. It is looking off to a condition and looking to that condition to supply you with security, with a sense of meaning, which means I don't actually have it in this moment. So I'm actually entering into that relationship as a kind of weakness, looking for that woman to complete me, to provide for me a sense of well-being. And the other person, the woman does it to the man as well. Or in any relationship. This is just this common example that people are most familiar with. The same thing can happen between parents. It can happen between siblings. My sister was my best friend. And then whatever it is that happens that drives us apart, I must have her back in my life. So this applies across the board, all relationships, all forms of romantic relationships, all forms of family relationships, co-workers, everything. If there is, as the basis of it, this urge to have that person in my life, it is going to be a disaster in one way or another. And let me be clear about that. This urge that is saying, that's where my happiness resides. It resides in getting that person into the conditions I want them in. You will never have a pure, genuine relationship in that condition. And we've seen this over and over again in the relationship roller coaster. If I get that person into my life with my present state of understanding, if my present state of understanding has me cycling through feeling bad, feeling sad, feeling insulted by other people, momentarily flattered, appreciated for a bit, then feeling myself being completely unnoticed, dropping into states of gloom or despair or depression. If that's my condition at the beginning, that's the condition I'm going to be in that relationship. The relationship isn't going to magically change you into something different. So it's not going to do any good to try to get that person back if something within you hasn't changed. This is one of those guiding principles I wish I had had when I was riding the relationship roller coaster. Same experience over and over again. Chase the other person, get the other person, then want to get rid of the other person. Then when I've gotten rid of the other person, then I want to get the person back. That whole cycle. And so when you have this moment of the breakup, let's say, we'll take that condition of relationships. Everything in me wants to go and get that person back. What can I expect to come of it if nothing within me has changed? I would be much better off spending my time reclaiming my own individual life where I'm not looking to somebody else to supply me with a few crumbs of happiness, a few moments of release from my life the way it normally is, where I have found this ever-renewing source of meaning that we talk about. So when you're struggling in a relationship crisis, this is an interesting thing to contemplate. What is it that you're really struggling with? What's the aim as you're there struggling with it? Well, on the surface, we say, I want to get that person back into my life. But if you look at it more closely, really, I just want to stop having to think about this. I want this to stop being a source of torment for me. That's really what I want. I just want relief from the torment of having to figure out, what am I going to do? How do I get the person back? So what I really want is the absence of having to think about, plan, control these circumstances. I just want freedom from all of that. I don't want to have to give my energy to it anymore. That's really what I want. So what we're saying there, remember, all of that takes place inside of my own mind, where I'm being tormented by it. Inside, remember the theater of our minds? Let's look at it here. This is where it applies. Things go wrong in that relationship. I'm sorry, I met somebody else. And suddenly there I am in the theater of my mind, reliving it and reliving it and reliving it. This version right here. What we've been learning in this course is that the entire crisis, there are the physical circumstances out there. The person made their decision to leave or not. But the crisis that I'm experiencing is what's playing inside this theater of my mind. The whole thing is a construction of my mind. That movie projector just keeps running and running and reliving and reliving. And the way we represented that was with this image. My mind actually projecting these images of what I once had and what I am now. Now, when you find yourself here in one of those crises like this, and this applies to any form, you've just lost somebody to a disease. This also applies to this condition as well. Remember what you were before having met this person. Now, this will be a little bit more difficult to really see into if the condition we're talking about is the loss of a loved one, an older sibling, let's say. But there will be these elements that apply. It'll be up to you to kind of discern what I'm talking about actually applies to that situation. But we stay with this romantic situation where the relationship breakup has happened. Remember what you were before you met that individual? How much power did they hold over you to either make your life or break your life? None. Not initially. You were essentially free of that person, which, by the way, is what makes the meeting of the person so enjoyable, is that you are free, you're placing no demands upon the person, and so what they are, all their unique qualities, strike you directly. Nothing standing in the way. But before you met that person, you were in this state of innocence where they couldn't command you, couldn't control you, couldn't shatter your life. And so this crisis, it has showed up to help return you back to that state of innocence, to shatter these chains that have gotten shackled onto your arms, your legs. Remember the Mack truck moment, the wall of limitation? That's what this crisis is here for. We have the Mack truck moment that is here to knock off this weight that I'm carrying around. In this case, the weight, here it's labeled as I'm special, but the weight can be attachment to a person. That's what I'm dragging around. Not that the person is this ball and chain, but my attachment to the person. The attachment is the weight. And so this crisis with this person, it creates a Mack truck moment to knock that off of me, to free me from that. Same thing applies with the wall of limitation. In the case of the Mack truck, a sudden collision with life circumstances. That's a Mack truck moment. That's there to free you. But then we also have these moments where the wall of limitation shows up, the thing I can't get around, which in a relationship could be, God, I have this grudge that just gets in the way of our relationship, or I can't commit to this person, or whatever the limitation might be. There's hundreds of variations. That wall is there. It shows up as a merciful force to help knock off this weight if we will use the wall for what it's intended, if we will work to walk through that wall. And so these crises are merciful forces that are intended to restore our native innocence so that we can't be touched by these blades of life. These, in this case, the blades of life would be where the moment takes a swipe at you in the form of this person is threatening to leave you or has left you, or anything similar when it comes to these relationships and what normally breaks our heart in them. See, life didn't really intend for this person to be your first. We're intended to have a different first. The different first is the understanding of what this life is really for and what we're really serving here as human beings. And that's what this whole course has been about, showing what that is. But we're raised in this sleeping world filled with ignorance, where nobody tells us about what this real purpose is. And so we look around and we see, well, everybody seems to be spending a lot of time investing a lot of their energy in finding relationships. And so a relationship becomes this substitute for having real wisdom, and we cling to it. Having that companionship is the only kind of security we've known up to that point, or clinging to whatever it is that we cling to. What we really want is to find this ever-renewing well of meaning or wisdom. So when you're in this relationship crisis and you're contemplating what to do, there's a few things to keep in mind. First, is life keeping the two of you together? So we're talking here in this situation about a breakup in a relationship, but it also applies in any kind of loss of relationship. Is life keeping you together? Because if the forces of life aren't keeping you together, do you really want to assume that role of having to keep the two of you together? A relationship that is actually beneficial to the parties involved in that relationship, that relationship is held together not by those two individuals, but by these greater laws of life. If they aren't holding that relationship together, it's not worth it for you to try to hold it together. Much better to let these natural forces play things out and for you to be there as the witness of what's unfolding. Because otherwise it's going to be a never-ending battle and struggle against these greater laws that we are under. So keep that in mind. Keep this in mind as well. Whatever it is you decide to do, will you be free if that person, if this situation, if the exact same thing happens again? Will you be free in peace, content? Or is the same upheaval going to happen? Because if I'm making a choice that's just returning me back to the same starting place, to the same shaky foundation, that's what I have to look forward to. And haven't you had this experience? I know I have. You get back together, there's the breakup, you get back together, and already, from the moment the person says, all right, we're back together, you're thinking, oh, geez, I don't know how this is. Is this really what I want? So keep that in mind as well. a few more guides to help with this. Again, back to roller coaster relationships. Beware of the mind's tricks. I was talking to somebody just the other night about, actually recounting my own experience in roller coaster relationships, where something like this tends to happen. Okay, it's been a rocky time. We decided we just got to go our own ways. And so you split up. And then a few hours later, maybe a day later, day and a half, you start to wonder, I wonder how she's doing. Or I wonder how he's doing. And something in you wants to check in, just a little text, everything going okay? And what will tend to happen is your own mind in these situations will project what that person is going through. It'll actually create what that person is going through, the hardship, the heartache. And in looking at that on the screen of your mind, and remember, in the same way that this nightmare gets generated, let's bring it up. In the same way that this nightmare gets generated, here we go. Hold on. In this cloud of imagination, the same thing happens with imagining what that other person is going through and then feeling the pain, the conflict that my own mind is creating. So back to this kind of feeling of longing, but now it's relative to relationships. Or the feeling of sadness of, I can't believe what that person is going through over there. The whole thing a production of my own mind. And so what do? I call, I text. It's done under the guise of, this is actually a virtuous act. I'm comforting the other person. That's not really what's happening. I'm taking the action to comfort myself. I was brought to a place of possible healing when we decided, okay, we're going to split up and we're just going to endure this temporary pain of the absence of this companionship. If a person were to do that and suffer through it all the way through the end of it, they would come out having gone through a kind of healing. But this healing process tends to get stopped short. And so what happens is our mind begins to think, here we are, without the normal companionship, without the normal false supports, not really sure what to do with ourselves. All this energy flowing through that would normally go into thinking about, God, how do I get out of this relationship? How do I fix it? None of that is happening. And so that energy gets directed into the movie theater of our mind. We start to think, I wonder how she's doing. She's probably over there crying. We've been yanked out of the place of real healing, plunked down in that theater of our mind, and our mind is now going to play this movie, generate this feeling of sadness, of regret, of guilt. And now we rush, what we think is rush to the assistance of that other person. All that's really happening is that we're taking that action so we can free ourselves from this guilt our own mind is creating. This is how the relationship roller coaster happens over and over again. We rush in not to rescue that person, but to rescue ourselves from what our own mind generates, whether it's projecting what that person's going through, or whether we're just going through this feeling of emptiness and I don't know what to do with this. Don't rush in to ease the pain of that other person. Let the healing happen for both of you. Here's another guideline to keep in mind in this whole area of relationships. Tolerate no lingering grudges or hard feelings. Vernon Howard had this great two-word phrase, instant recovery. And we've talked about essentially the same action throughout this course. Instant recovery. You have a moment where you have to make a correction in the household. This isn't where we're not going to start stacking our dishes here next to the sink. These get put in the dishwasher, whatever it is, the correction you have to make. And that will tend to invoke in the other person some resistance, a little bit of maybe a flash of negativity, potentially. Instant recovery. If I'm the person who just got corrected, rather than sit there and stew over what was said, see the rightness of it, or the wrongness of it. Maybe the person's off the mark, and then drop it. Don't carry that grudge of, I don't care, whatever you want to do. You know that lingering grudge that tends to kind of like a dark perfume just kind of starts to fill the rest of the evening, fill the air for the rest of that night? Move on instantly back to presence and the virtues that flow through presence effortlessly. Don't get stuck in that grudge. Here's another thing to keep in mind. Remember when we looked at the jewel of life? Remember how we said that each of us is born here as this jewel of life, and that within this jewel are all of these individual facets of experience, facets of different virtues, different things that are in us to be brought out and experienced and understood and actually appreciated, worshipped, celebrated. And it's the dark things and the bright things. All of it is part of this jewel of what we are. Because all of this is already within you, nobody on the planet has anything to give you that isn't already yours, that isn't already within you. And so that relationship then, with this understanding, the basis of it, the purpose for it, becomes something completely different. You know, people think that happiness comes from that relationship. It doesn't. Happiness is within you. Aspects of a relationship can highlight that experience of happiness. But that happiness remains whether you have that relationship there to shine the light upon it or you don't. And so you may not experience it when that person leaves, but you move into, as you go through your life, you walk into another circumstance and you see the joy of a little kitten and a little puppy playing. Out comes the happiness again. It's not really it's not really coming into you from that relationship. It is always within you, and it simply gets reflected out in the circumstances. The circumstances get their meaning from what you are. Now you get to experience that facet of the jewel. So with this understanding, I don't need to cling to anybody. And I also stop placing impossible demands upon them, that they should be the source of my happiness. I begin to realize there's no such thing as that. So now there's no anxious fear that that person might leave you. No demands being placed upon them. You must stay here with me. Now the two of you are suddenly free to enjoy this exploration of this jewel together. You know, that I just mentioned that clinging nature. You know, that is really what drives people out of our lives, is when we are, and it can be so subtle. You may never make a statement like, I need you, I'm depending upon you. You are my security. You're my everything. You may never say it, but your being radiates it. Like that warmth that comes off of a light bulb. You can't see it, but you can definitely feel it. That clinging nature is felt by the other person, and that's what drives people out of our lives. People don't want to be boxed in, fastened down, secured in place. I mean, it's one of those questions. How much do I like it when somebody does that to me? And that clinging nature, realize it expresses itself in a multitude of different ways. So there can be the actual cry for your company. Don't leave me. But that clinging nature, it can also come through as a kind of nonstop or ceaseless bickering and criticism A clinging nature is what is always criticizing somebody, trying to get them exactly in the shape they want them in. That's the clinging nature. All right, I've got 3 more of these guides. How are we doing? Okay, not too bad. It's always perfectly acceptable and right for somebody in a relationship to say, look, this is going to be a pleasant, positive, enjoyable relationship, or there's not going to be a relationship. That's not cold. That's not harsh. That is actually loving. Because what you're essentially saying is, I'm not going to subject either one of us to something that steals possibilities, that makes it more difficult to serve this real purpose of our lives. I'm not going to suggest either one of us to this exhausting conflict. So just let that kind of swirl around in your mind that, wow, that would actually be a loving action if that were needed. Another thing, forget all about this idea of having to get closure. There is really no such thing. The whole urge for closure is, I can't understand why you did that, and I'm so disturbed over what you've done that I need to have some explanation that is satisfactory to me. That's what closure is. And you don't need that at all, because it's going to be a false satisfactory closure. If you can't look out at any action from another human being and be at ease with it, be in a state of peace with it, not that you are condoning it, no judgment at all, just this quiet knowing, this quiet contact with what that person is doing, that leaves you in this place of wholeness. You're not fractured into pieces by what they've done. And by the way, this is all a natural fruit of understanding more and more about what makes me do what I do, what makes other people do what they do. This is a kind of understanding that begins to move in 2 directions. The more I understand about me, automatically I'm understanding more about you and everybody else. So this urge for closure is essentially an admission that I don't understand people. I don't understand why I do what I do. I don't understand why they do what they do. There's no such thing as understanding what you do while at the same time not being able to understand what another person does. I know it seems like that is possible. But that level of understanding is always, whatever that level of understanding is, it always applies to everything equally. So if there's confusion in my life relative to what this person is doing, there is going to be some confusion about what it is that I'm doing. There are going to be these places where, God, I just don't, I think I understand what's happening, but I really don't. So you don't need that closure. And what would closure mean anyway? Do you think that the relationship actually has this abrupt end at that point? Even if you refuse to see the person for the rest of your life, you are still in relationship with that person. And the relationship is one of pure resistance and exclusion. That's the relationship. Where's the closure? There is no such thing as this closure, this complete ending of something in this way. Another thing along the lines of this having to get closure, the urge to get revenge or the urge to enact justice. This is all a kind of childish response of having been betrayed, but misunderstanding the nature of the betrayal. Because I wasn't, even if I was in terms of the ostensible outward circumstances, there was an actual betrayal there. The first betrayal that then gives the pain to the betrayal out there. The first betrayal was where I turned to another person to supply me with contentment, security, whatever word you want to use. That was the first betrayal. That's where the real betrayal happened. So this urge to get revenge or to enact justice, justice is always being enacted, not in man's system of justice, not even close. But life's system of justice is instantaneous. And if that person is cruel, taking advantage of you, they are living in a world of isolation that is its own punishment right from the very beginning. Life is tending to what they need. And in some cases, what's happening is life is bringing them to this place of a deeper and darker descent into egotism, into me as the center of the moment, into only what I want at the exclusion of what anybody else would want. And so that person is going to a more and more isolation. Now, it might take a couple years for that person to get to this place of rock bottom, but that justice is happening. You cannot escape life's justice. Life's justice. Man's justice is just a trinket down here. It's a set of toys. All right, so what I want to end with is what I would say is the single, at least for me personally, the single most powerful guide when it comes to having a right, true relationship. It didn't come from me. This was conveyed to us through Vernon Howard. Here's what he said. Make no move to rescue the relationship. Make no move to push it away. Make no move to rescue the relationship. Make no move to push it away. Talk about a beacon of light. You know what it's like to want the relationship, get the relationship, want to push it away, living in that terrible cycle. And again, this applies to the loss of close, dear people in our lives. Make no move to rescue the relationship. Make no move to push it away. Don't get wrongly involved with whatever it is that unfolds. But in the case of here with these relationships with friends, romantic relationships, coworkers, I mean, you can see how this applies within the family, between parents and kids. Make no move to rescue the relationship. Make no move to push it away. Where does that leave me? Normally, I'm always pushing an agenda. I'm either trying to secure that person, repair this relationship, rescue it, or get them back into my life. Or I'm getting more and more irritated. I think we got to go our own ways. I'm pushing the person out of my life. Then there's all of the assessing that goes on almost on a daily basis, probably on a daily basis, of how are we doing? What's the state of the relationship? Are we okay? Is this all of that contemplation, pushing this agenda, being driven along by longing? Hopefully I can secure this. Hopefully I can get away from this. No more of that pushing of the agenda. If life keeps this relationship together, it's going to stay together. If life drives this relationship apart, it should be apart. Life knows better than I do which it should be. We're talking about this great intelligence that knows better whether this relationship should stay together or should be dissolved. Now, this new action is going to put you through an entirely new experience. If you know what it's been like to go through the relationship roller coaster, or to go through, whether we're talking about, romantic relationships, or we're talking about sibling relationships, relationships in the family, down at work. Oh, Joe, I think Joe's liking me now. The work relationship. There's that person who's always gruff and upset and just irritable. I think he's starting to. Geez, I don't think he's. God, I got to get him back on. Somehow I have to get back into his favor. No more of that. No demands that the relationship go a certain way. No more rushing in to rescue it. This is a real way to live. This is a real possibility. Freedom in that relationship from the very beginning. You're welcome to stay. You're welcome to go. I place no demand upon you. Okay, so take all of these guides into your relationships. In these moments of crisis, come back to this talk. Use it to help find your way through to this new way of being in relationship, this new and true way. So you can begin this tonight. Find a relationship where normally there's something in you. Oh, I should add this too. This doesn't mean that you now just let somebody be a complete slob around the house. It doesn't mean that you're not attentive to the needs of the moment. Not at all. In fact, in this way, you'll finally be able to enact the things that up to that point maybe you've been compromising on. Because it isn't, when we say make no move to push it away, make no move to rescue it, what your aim should be is to simply be true to the needs of the moment. You may have to voice something difficult in that relationship, like we talked about earlier. This is going to be a pleasant relationship, or it's not going to be a relationship. You're not pushing it away. You're not trying to rescue it. You're saying, this is the code that I must live by. You're welcome to be a part of it or not. So anyway, as an exercise, think of a relationship where you know that there's been a part of you that's been trying to control it, push it away, secure it, hold it down, and experiment with withdrawing yourself from some of those activities. Just find one little activity. Don't make that little hint about how the person should be. Don't make that little weak offer up that weak question of, are you okay? Are you mad at me? And watch the change that happens in those relationships. All right, let us know what you learned in all of this. We'll see you in the next lesson.